So we are now only a few days away from getting the new endgame progression systems for the second expansion of Diablo 4 finally revealed to us. And while we don't know a lot of the specifics of these systems yet, I did want to go over all of the information we have and some of the things I would like to see in these systems, because I think when it specifically comes to endgame progression, crafting, build crafting, and just creating the build and play style you want to play, I think all of that is going to pretty heavily change with the second expansion. And I think this is actually the most exciting part of this upcoming expansion, how much different our build crafting is going to be. Now, we do have a bit of a description of these overhauls and new systems. So new and improved systems pave the way for deep customization and enhanced variety for all 8 classes. No matter how you play, major skill tree reworks, including new skill variants for every class, along with level cap increases, will refresh how you customize and build power. A new loot filter will ease the discovery of desired items, plus with Lord of Hatred, unlock bonus skill variants across each class, explore a fresh take on crafting systems like the iconic Horadric Cube, and equip set bonuses with the new Tailsman. And there's a few really specific things in that description that we'll go more over as we get into those systems. Now, just to get something out of the way, first off, we have the loot filter coming with the expansion. We don't know how this is going to work in Diablo 4, if it's just going to be a loot filter like other games, where certain items drop, they're not part of our loot filter, we basically don't see them, or if the loot filter is going to tie into scrapping of items or salvaging of items. Because right now in Diablo 4, once you get up to the torment difficulties, a lot of items, specifically like rare items, you don't even see anymore. They just get instantly salvaged when they drop. And I know a lot of people have been saying we should have that in this loot filter, to where the things you filter out just kind of get automatically salvaged. Now, I do think that may not actually happen for like legendaries and above, because realistically that would mean everybody has to use a loot filter, and the more you filter items down, the faster you'll be able to do things, because everything will be auto salvaged. You don't have to go back near as much. And I think that'll just change how people actually use the system too heavily. So I actually hope the loot filter really doesn't do that. The thing I think would be much better is if they just make the other rarities in the game a lot more usable and actually add something to them so they're usable and sought after in the end game. So all you're doing with the loot filter is choosing what type of rolls you want on the items to actually be shown to you. And also keep in mind, as we're going through all of these, we're still going to have the progression and customization systems we have right now. So we're going to have the crafting systems being the enchantment system, so we can change a stat. We're still going to have the changing of the aspects. We're still going to have masterworking and tempering. We don't know if there's going to be any big overhauls or changes to those systems. Presumably there will be some amount of changes. I think the aspect system will probably be one of the bigger ones, but based upon all the information we have, we will still have all of those systems. We will also still have the Paragon system, and it doesn't seem like we're getting any big overhauls with that with the expansion. There could possibly be some smaller changes with that, but nothing as big as an actual overhaul. So we're not really losing much, but some of the systems are getting overhauled, and more specifically, the biggest one being the skill tree rework. Now, I think the most impactful of these new systems or overhauls is going to be the overhaul to our skill trees, because it's going to be pretty massive, and there's still a handful of things we don't know about it. But the main things we do know is the skill tree is getting a big overhaul, and from everything we've seen, there isn't going to be any passives in the skill tree anymore, or they're at least in a different spot, or maybe in their own skill tree. And the main thing we're going to be doing in the skill trees now is choosing a skill and having a lot more customization for each ones of those skills. Now, all of the skills are also going to have 12 skill rank ups you can get within the skill tree, which would make sense. We're getting more points as we're getting a higher level cap in the expansion. And if there are no passives in the skill tree anymore, that frees up a lot of additional points. And with all of the skills having 12 ranks now, or at least all of the non-ultimate skills, because I don't think we've seen any ultimate skills yet, but I'm wondering if those 12 ranks are going to have more passives or upgrades within them like we have with ultimates right now. If you haven't played in a while or just don't know, about this. Our ultimate skills right now in the game have 5 ranks like everything else, but once you put 5 points into them, they give you some other effect, like Petrify for the Druid. When you cast it, it resets the cooldowns of all of your other non-ultimate skills, and every ultimate in the game has its own passive, from new effects to cooldown reductions to damage increases to resetting your cooldowns. So all the ultimates do give you some other effect when you put all of the points into it you can. I'm wondering if all the skills are going to have something like this now, and with 12 ranks, you could see multiple of these, like maybe at 5 points you get some new effect, at 10 you get a new effect, and maybe at 12, or more than likely if there's something like this, it would either be put 12 points in and you get a new effect, or maybe you put 6 points in, you get an effect, and at 12 you get an effect, which I think would probably be the best. And this is something that would give you a lot more options to building into certain skills, because even if we don't have passives, and considering we're getting more levels for even more skill points, 12 ranks into a skill is using up a lot of your skill points. So you probably won't really be able to put 12 ranks into all of your skills. You probably wouldn't want to, but putting additional effects or upgrades or things like that in the skills themselves actually makes putting more and more points into them much more worthwhile outside of just like base damage increases and cooldown reductions. So hopefully there is something within the skill ranks of the skills themselves. But then we have the pretty big overhaul to skill upgrades. Now, as of right now, everything besides a paladin, you learn the skill, then it has one upgrade that has no choice. You just put 1 point into that. Then you have a choice between 1 out of 2 upgrades. Most of these upgrades being pretty simple. Some of them for some specific skills have more impactful changes. But now in the rework skill tree, it's completely changed. You have 2 side paths where you choose one of 2 options. These are circular upgrades, so I'm assuming these are going to be more similar to the upgrades we have on skills right now. There's just going to be more choices of that, because each direction you go, there's 2 options instead of like right now where you don't have an option, you just take upgrade 1, then one of 2 options. And those are the side paths. Those are probably going to be less substantial, more just probably throughput increases or some amount of utility. But then you can go down the middle path and you choose between 3 to 4 different options that are in boxes instead of circles, and these are the skill variants. Now, these skill variants are going to be much more substantial changes to how the skill works than we've ever had in the skill trees in Diablo 4 so far. And in my mind, these are probably going to work a bit closer to runes in Diablo 3, where if you never played Diablo 3, you would essentially choose a rune as an upgrade to a skill, and it could very heavily change up the skill. It could change up the element, it could change up how the skill worked, it could change up what that skill did, so that would be a pretty big part of your build. And my presumption is that this upgrade selection is going to do something similar to that. We've already gotten a look at some parts of these skill trees, and within these variants, there are elemental changes, there are changes to how the skills work. Like for instance, they showed off ball lightning for a sorcerer, where they're shooting forward a normal ball lightning that just goes forward and shocks things. But then they chose one of the variants that showed as like a fire icon, and instead of shooting forward a ball lightning, they were now placing these big balls of fire on the ground that look like they burn the ground below them as well. So it completely changed up the element of the skill and how the skill actually worked. And we did get to see in the sorcerer tree as well, one of their skills had 4 options instead of the 3. Every other skill we've seen so far has 3. So it seems like some skills are also just going to have more options, and this is going to give a lot more differences in every single build than it did previously. Within the small gameplay trailer for this expansion, we also got to see some other options. Incinerate for the sorcerer, there was a lightning one. There was, I think, a frost hydra. So instead of having fire hydra, there was a frost one, if I'm not mistaken. There are also some other skills that we saw completely different elements for them. And outside of just being a different element, these variants are also going to change up pretty heavily how the skills actually work, which is going to be, I think, the more interesting part. And as you may recall at the start of this video when I went over the small description, it also says that there are going to be new skill variants for every skill in the game. Plus, once you get Lord of Hatred, there will be additional skill variants. So I'm wondering if there's also going to be more skill variants for skills that they haven't shown, even in the small pieces of gameplay and screenshots we've gotten of these new skill trees. So there may actually be more variants for a bunch of skills that we haven't seen yet. And if you don't even consider any of the other new endgame progression systems coming with the expansion, I think just this skill tree rework will actually have a massive impact on how many different builds there are in the game that are good or even passable. And it's going to add just a lot more variation and options in customizing your build and giving you a lot more options in the other systems in the game. Because if you just added the skill tree into the game right now, it would have a pretty big impact on all of the other systems as well. Because if you could just go and change one of your skills right now into a different element and change a bit how it works, this would potentially have you change a bunch of other things in your build. Aspects, maybe different uniques, maybe different temperings. So I think this will probably have the biggest impact out of any of these new reworks or systems. Now that brings us to the system that I think we know the least about, just because there are so many different potential options that could come with this system, and this is the return of the Horadric Cube. Now we know now that the Horadric Cube is not going to be something you bring with you. We did get to see it in game on this like podium seeming to be in the new town of the new area of the expansion. More than likely there will be a Horadric Cube in most of the main towns in the game, but it's not something you bring with you. It seems like the Horadric Cube is just going to be this thing in town that encompasses a bunch of different new crafting systems and things like that. Now, the only thing we've really seen about the Horadric Cube is in the gameplay trailer. They showed the Horadric Cube. They had like a dagger inside of it that then they infused with 2 different runes, and it turned into like a fiery dagger. And I think what they were kind of showing there is that at least some part of the Horadric Cube is going to work kind of similar to how it worked in Diablo 2, where pretty much anything in the game, runes, resources, items could be used in some form of craft within it, whether it be an item with like some runes and resources to change it into a specific item or a randomized different item or a higher rarity item. So there's a bunch of different random crafting things you could do with the cube in Diablo 2, and my presumption is that they are going to be adding things like that in this version of the Horadric Cube, where we can use a lot more of the plethora of different resources in the game in the cube to do different things with them. I would not be surprised if there are also a bunch of different progression crafting systems within the Horadric Cube. The first thing I think of is that they are going to add something like sanctification in the Horadric Cube. They do specifically say when describing the cube that it is going to have crafting systems within it. So I assume that also means that there are going to be crafting systems in terms of like endgame progression or gear modification or something like that. So I could very much see a world where they add in the Horadric Cube. We could take a bunch of resources and craft different items and put in like random legendaries to craft them into something else, or maybe put in random rares and craft them into something else. But then we will also have gear crafting. We could put in an item and infuse it with certain runes and get new effects on an item, or I could also very much see, as I mentioned, sanctification, and even maybe having something like chaos armor in this system as well. Like maybe there's some much more rare craft that you take a unique item and you take a bunch of much more rare resources and you can maybe change that unique into a chaos unique, which would be changing it to like a different item slot. And then there's just a plethora of additional endgame crafting systems you could potentially add into this. So that's a reason we don't actually know a ton about the Horadric Cube yet, just because there are so many different things they could do, and they have described it as having plural crafting systems. So it seems like the Horadric Cube is going to contain a bunch of different systems within the cube itself. Now, the final system, and one that I think is going to be bigger than a lot of people have been thinking, is the new Tailsman system. And this is going to be what's adding set items and set bonuses into the game. So we're going to be having this new UI element, maybe it's in a different menu or something, that's a Tailsman. It'll have 6 different slots on the outside where you put in new items, presumably new farming items that could either be something like a charm or a rune. It does have different rune symbols on them. And then depending on the combination of these new items you put on the outer rings, they all channel into the middle one and give you some type of set bonuses that'll give you new effects or allow you to do new things. Now, Diablo as a franchise has actually tried to make a Tailsman system before in Diablo 3. This is one of the systems they showed off before the game was released, and they ended up scrapping it. This was essentially going to be the replacement for charms in Diablo 2, which were items you would get that would just essentially give you like stat increases that you would keep in your inventory. Other games have more modernized versions of that, like the idle system from Last Epoch. And it seems like they're taking that idea, making it set bonuses and adding it into Diablo 4 as its own UI window, so we don't have to have set bonuses on gear themselves. Now, we did get to see a little bit of what these can do in the gameplay trailer, and specifically with the Tailsman itself, whatever these new things are that we're putting into it to get the bonus effects do seem to have class symbols on them, because they showed ones for a druid, and all of these items had druid paws on them. Now, this kind of tells me that there are probably going to be specific ones for every class, and then there are probably going to be generic versions of whatever these new items are that'll probably give you more generic set bonus effects. But they did show us a little bit of gameplay after they showed us a Tailsman, where a druid goes into Grizzly Rage, bear version of Grizzly Rage, and they started using lightning skills specifically that they couldn't use previously. So something like Storm Strike, which is a lightning skill you can't normally use in the werebear version of Grizzly Rage. So basically just allowing you to use skill combinations you couldn't before. There was also some new effects on the druid that we don't currently have. The trample the druid used caused a new earth effect that we haven't seen before, and it caused a big earth AoE at the end of it that we haven't seen before. So presumably these are going to add new effects, new animations, and new possible combinations that you haven't been able to use previously. But outside of that, we don't really know how this is going to work. We don't know how these new items that we're actually getting to put in the Tailsman are going to work. We don't know if they're going to have additional rarities or anything like that. We don't know if the set bonuses are all going to be like, you need 2 of this to get this set bonus and 4 of this to get this set bonus, or if they're all going to have their own specific effects that combine together, or if all of them are part of sets. We don't exactly know how it's going to work. There's probably going to be a lot of build customization within this new Tailsman system that presumably is going to be much more focused on gameplay changes and interactions instead of just like power or stat increases. And I think one of the really interesting parts that I really haven't heard anybody even theorize about is, like I mentioned, the items we're getting and putting into these Tailsmans are probably going to be new farmed items that are probably also going to be used in the Horadric Cube crafting system. But there's also a really big potential of these items, say, having different rarities, maybe that'll increase the effects of them, and maybe even being super rare items in themselves that we have to go out into the game to farm, which just adds a completely new item type that we have to go out and farm for. Maybe they drop in different areas, and maybe some of them are super rare. Like maybe they have rarity. Like maybe we could get legendary versions of these things we put in Tailsmans. Maybe we could get up to like mythic versions that give us some crazy bonus to the set effect or something like that. So there's definitely a lot that could also just be with the items we're putting in this themselves. There's quite a lot that could potentially be happening with this Tailsman system. So that's pretty much everything we know about the new endgame progression systems coming with the second expansion for Diablo 4, whether it be new systems entirely or overhauls to existing systems. This is seeming to be the big changes coming to more specifically build crafting, because again, there could be a ton of stuff in the Horadric Cube, and then we also have a ton of other things that's probably going to change how we build craft, and more specifically the big endgame overhaul, which is probably going to change how readily we can obtain pretty much all loot or materials or items in the game. And then you also have to keep it in consideration that there will always be another season coming, and there will be a new season launching with the expansion. We don't know how extensive that will be. My presumption with that is there probably won't be like any new powers or things like that with the season with the new expansion specifically, just to not muddy the waters of how people like all of these new progression systems that are permanent to the game. But that's pretty much all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.